Hey everyone, welcome. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So today, you guys, we're going to go over how to save thousands on your student loans. Hopefully, uh, we can keep it relatively short. I know it's a little later in the evening, and we'll do some Q&A at the end. And if you guys can just, should be able to type in questions. If anybody can't hear me, or if the sound is muffled, just please text the questions in the question box. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and get started. So if you have big student loans and are really serious about getting rid of them, this is really going to be good stuff for you. Maybe you're a young professional in training. Maybe you're getting started with residency, or you're in the middle of residency and life's crazy busy and you're just not sure how to handle it all. Or let's say you're in training and you're on a really tight budget and you're just thinking, what's the best approach for handling all this stuff? Or maybe you're already in practice and you're fed up with paying 7% on a student loan. You see your mortgage at 4% and you know there's got to be a better alternative. Or maybe you're just starting to make good money and you're ready to crush your student loans. Or maybe you've just been putting your head in the sand and now you feel like it's time to start to turn things around. So if you're in any of those situations, I think this will be pretty good content for you. So my name is Daniel Wren. I'm a financial planner in Lexington, Kentucky, but I would not consider myself like a typical financial planner. What I mean is I used to be a typical financial planner. And what I did was I basically was a product salesman at a big firm. I was really the same as pretty much all the other financial advisors running around town. And what I began to realize is that it seems like what people really need is objective guidance and less conflicts. I realized they needed somebody more on like their side of the table. I was kind of having like a Jerry Maguire type of moment, and I bounced up out of there and took my fish and started my own firm about a little over a year ago. I gave up all the product sales, all the commissions, cold turkey, so that I could cut out the conflicts and work strictly for clients. So as a result of this, one of the big areas we've started to focus on is student loan planning, partly because it's such a big deal for so many of our clients. And it's become ridiculously complicated. It's nuts. It's too complicated. So quick little disclosure. I don't receive any compensation from any of the companies that I will mention. If you have specific advice, you should consult your advisor. Anything mentioned in here is just opinions. You know the drill. So I want to start by sharing some examples of the student loan stories that we see and share some common pitfalls to avoid, and then go into 3 steps that you can begin to use, start taking action and saving on your student loans. So first, I want to go over some definitions I think are helpful to clarify before we get into some of this, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So the first is forbearance and capitalization. So forbearance is a period where you're paying very low payments or zero payments, typically for up to 12 months. I would consider it an extremely poor financial decision. However, it seems that most or a lot in medical residency are going the forbearance route. And that's partly why I mention it. It seems to be the most common choice of medical residents. What I hear people saying the reason they choose it is because maybe they aren't going for public service loan forgiveness. Maybe they feel their payments would be so small that it would have no impact. Or maybe they're on such a tight budget and they just want to have a life in residency. Or maybe they're overwhelmed with all the choices and they just default to forbearance. Or maybe they feel their future employer will pay the student loans. But either way, it's a terrible idea. Why is it such a terrible idea? The first thing is capitalization. So you can see on the graph here, this is meant to illustrate how interest capitalization works. So the blue line or the blue bar represents a loan that is not capitalizing, which would be equivalent to the income-driven repayment loan. And the red bar is a loan that is capitalizing. What this basically shows you is when interest capitalizes, you pay interest on your interest. When it doesn't, you don't. So with the blue line, your interest on this example $200,000 loan at 10% is $20,000 every year. It's just $20,000 all 5 years. Simple. Whereas when interest capitalizes, it gets added back to the principal. So the first year, it's $20,000 because your principal's $200,000. But then the second year, it's $22,000 because you're then charged interest on $220,000. And then the third year, because the interest gets added back again, you're charged on $242K. So your interest is $24,200. So what happens is it has a compounding effect, which is why the red line accelerates and grows to a much larger number than the blue line. So you want to avoid capitalization when possible. And it's the number one reason why forbearance is such a bad idea, because it allows your loans to capitalize. Some of the other reasons it's a bad idea is that the government stops paying your interest on subsidized loans when you forbear. Also, you miss out on student loan tax deductions at a time when you're more likely to be within the income limits for that. So the second thing is consolidation. Consolidation, excuse me, is where you combine multiple loans into one new loan, typically with the same interest rates. A lot of times people sell the interest rates and payments on a consolidation, and in reality, that's not really relevant. The reasons you might consolidate would be to consolidate an old variable rate federal loan, or to lock in non-qualified public service loan forgiveness loans into qualified public service loan forgiveness loans. The key with consolidation is it resets your public service loan forgiveness clock. And then the third is refinance. That's totally different. Refinance is where you qualify for a new loan based on your financial circumstances, and you use the new loan to pay off old loans. It's typically done to lower interest rates. So keep in mind, if you use a refinance to pay off federal loans, you're going to be losing some of those federal loan perks. So you kind of got to weigh those pros and cons. And then the fourth thing is public service loan forgiveness. For those that aren't familiar with public service loan forgiveness, the big thing with it is qualifying. So you have to be qualified in several different areas. I would think it's really pretty simple. You gotta be having qualified payments first. Second, you gotta have qualifying loans. Third, you gotta be in a qualifying job. And fourth, you gotta repeat payments 120 times. And then fifth, you have to prove it. The unique thing about public service loan forgiveness is it's kind of the reverse of most loans. You want to pay the least amount possible in that 10-year period, because at the end, it's going to be forgiven either way. So in this graph, you see three different scenarios of loan repayment at varying repayment levels. Ideally, with public service loan forgiveness, you want to be in the blue line, because ultimately that would result in greater forgiveness. So on to the examples I wanted to share. So let's say we have a medical resident, and let's say they're ahead of the curve. They know they want to go for public service loan forgiveness, like right away, like just from the get-go. They know they're going to, say, work at like a UK academic institution. So they start off on the right track using payee repayment. At year 2, though, he hears consolidation is a good idea because he has an FFEL loan, an old loan, moves forward with it, and then unfortunately he kind of screws it up. He resets his 120 payment clock, and he never ends up consolidating the most important part, the FFEL loan. And not to mention, through that whole process, he gets a little behind and forgets to reapply for income-driven repayment, which forces him into standard repayment. He can't afford those big payments with standard repayment and ultimately ends up in forbearance, which lasts for a year. He finally gets back on the whole income-driven repayment in the 4th year, but throughout the whole period in his 4-year residency, he never does the analysis to determine if he should file separately when it was a prime opportunity in his situation. So all that results in him missing out on tens and thousands of dollars of opportunity. And part of it is he's just so busy. It's overwhelming. So let's talk about another recent medical school grad and say they're feeling what I like to call it the forbearance temptation as they approach residency. Let's say she's single. She has $180,000 direct loan. 40 of it is subsidized with an income of $50,000. So she's unsure about public service loan forgiveness. So she's considering 2 options: payee and forbearance. She could probably keep up with payee, but she's kind of thinking, why not wait to start repaying it when I'm making the big bucks? So she ends up talking to her friends and buddies, and most of them are doing forbearance. So ultimately, she decides to do the same. So what's the net impact? Fast forward 3 years. The cost of that decision is $19,820 with everything considered, in exchange for avoiding $9,720 in payments over 3 years. That's equivalent to just over a 16% ROI, which in my book is a bad move. So these types of scenarios I would consider the norm, unfortunately. Almost every complex loan case I come across has some level of inefficiency associated with it, and it's become ridiculously challenging to keep up with all of it. One of the other things, to my surprise, is with public service loan forgiveness, only 3.68% of people are applying for employment verification. So either 96% are just totally missing the boat on this, or they're procrastinating filing the form. My concern with that, the latter, is that there's going to be issues they're unaware of that will ultimately cause problems. So let's talk about the 3 areas I feel like are really most important to consider with big student loans. So the first is, which we've already mentioned some, is the public service loan forgiveness management. And it really is a management. There's a lot to consider with it. So you got to think, what is the goal of public service loan forgiveness maximization? So remember, we said qualifying payments, qualifying loans, qualifying job, repeat, prove it. So you got to make sure you're all positioned properly. Second thing, adjusted gross income. It's a big deal. So that's your taxable income, your salary less some deductions. So it sets your payment for income-driven repayment. Lower adjusted gross income equals lower payments. And remember, the goal is to pay the least amount possible over that period of time, which ultimately results in greater forgiveness. So you got to be on the ball with public service loan forgiveness. You got to be smart when you're applying, when you're applying. The timing is essential. Say, for instance, you're getting married to somebody that's going to have a considerably higher income. It's a good idea to file for income-driven repayments before you get married, if you have control over that. But it's all a timing deal, and you got to always pay on time. I see that more than you would think. People miss a payment or two, and that adds up. So you have to be on the ball, and you don't want to forget to file the annual employment verification. A ton of people are doing this. You don't want to be one of those people. You gotta keep on that, because that'll keep you from having any screw ups that sneak up on you. And the last thing is is what I call, I made this term up, but it's public service loan forgiveness boosters. So there's several different strategies you can use to help or increase your ultimate forgiveness. So what are public service loan forgiveness boosters? So the first thing is above the line tax deductions. So you can see this in the picture. These are all the above the line tax deductions. The big ones, the most common ones are like IRA deductions or health savings account contributions, student loan interest, those sorts of things. So if you have line items there, that's going to reduce your adjusted gross income, which will ultimately reduce your repayment. So on that public service graph, that additional deduction might change you from the red line to the blue line. So it's potentially a great thing. So a classic example I see is most residents think that a Roth IRA is the best investment vehicle, and it might be. However, when you're going for public service loan forgiveness, you got to also consider that a alternative traditional IRA will further reduce your income-driven repayment. So what does it all equate to? It ends up being about a 9 to 15% savings on your repayment, and it's a pure savings. So if you put 1,000 into an IRA, it might result in 100 of savings. So you just have to be cognizant of all these sorts of things. And then the second thing with public service loan forgiveness boosters is the tax filing status. So do you file jointly or single, married filing single? And this is only available on payee and IBR, but it can be a big deal. So this is just an example I like to share. So Bob's a resident, he's earning $50K. His wife, Judy, earns $60K. They have no kids. Bob owes $250 on his 100% federal public service eligible, the whole 9 yards. And Judy has none. So ultimately, if they file jointly, their AGI is 107,500. It's lower because of their student loan interest. And so they'll owe $13,319 in taxes in that scenario, the filing jointly. Ultimately, if they do that, his payee payment will be $8,364 for the following year. If they file separately, the AGI for Bob is $50K, and their taxes will be slightly higher by $631. But his payee payment will be lower by $4,752. So what you got to do is you have to do this analysis each year. Ultimately, for this example, it's a net benefit of $4,121 by filing separately. So it's a big deal for this scenario and a lot of people, something it's definitely worth doing regularly. So alternatives to public service loan forgiveness. Really the biggest is the whole student loan refinance. So some of the things to consider before you refinance. So with federal loans, they come with all these nice benefits like forgiveness options, discharge at death, discharge at disability, lots of flexibility with forbearance. So if you take a federal loan and refinance it into a private loan, the first thing you have to understand is you will be giving up a lot of these government benefits. It's not to say that it's a bad idea, it's just something you got to understand. Second thing is you need to know fixed versus variable. A lot of the refinance companies are promoting variable interest rates. I see a lot of people taking variable interest rates. I would discourage or use caution at best taking on a variable interest rate, especially if you're going to take some time to pay it off. You want to get really organized before you refinance. You want to know your credit score, because they're going to check it. You want to know it before they check it. You want to know detailed loan situation. You want to be very familiar with your net worth, all that sort of stuff. So you got to have ultimately, you got to have your financial ducks in a row. You got to have risks covered. You got to have plenty of cash. You got to have good credit, your budget in order, I think, for it to work well. And there's lots of lenders now that are doing it. So you want to do your homework and read the promissory note. So you can see in this example that I've included screenshots for. This is a $200,000 loan at 7% interest, and they're in a 10-year repayment schedule, comparing it to a 4.5% interest rate. So this is a scenario, a typical refinance. So the monthly payment, is just under $250 or so less per month. It's quite a bit of interest savings over the period of the loan. It's about $29,000. So I also have included a screenshot for the month by month. So it starts out even better. The beginning it's front-loaded benefits. So in the first month alone, it's $416 in interest savings. Over the first 6 months, it's $2,500 in additional interest savings. So if refinance is a good fit for your situation, it's something to do. If you're going to do it, you want to do it ASAP. Because every month, you got to think of it. If you owe $200,000, every month is like kind of tossing out $416 out the window. But you got to make sure it's a good fit first. So some of the refinance lenders, and by the way, they've been growing like crazy. Not only have the companies been growing, but there's new companies that are popping up. Seems like every couple of months. So these are some of the ones that I'm familiar with. So what I like to do is kind of summarize some of the more common or beneficial lenders for certain situations. So for the low risk borrower that's like really got their ducks in a row, First Republic has the lowest. They have extremely low fixed rate loans, like incredibly low, like 2.5%. But it's very, very difficult to qualify for their refinance. But if you are an ideal risk, it might be a perfect fit. For the medical resident, Link Capital or DRB, they're fantastic. They're really the only ones that will refinance medical residents. And so what they've done is they've created these refinance terms that are similar to forbearance or income-based repayment. So it works well with the resident budget. For dentists, I like DRB. Most of that, or part of that, is because they have a really nice ADA discount, which is a quarter point rate reduction for the life of the loan. And then for flexible underwriting and just structuring it however you want, Earnest works really well. And then for like the fast application, if you just want an answer quick, SoFi is just as quick as you can get. So these are some of the players in the refinance world. So I think the most important part, really, of all of this is having a student loan, what I like to call like your student loan plan. Because really that becomes, it's kind of like your map. It gives you direction. It keeps you on course. It's like anything. You gotta plan ahead. So what it comes down to, the way I would summarize your plan, an ideal student loan plan, is it starts out with your situation. So you have the student loan details. The student loan details have gotten fairly intense, and you want to understand the fine details. So for federal loans, the best, or really the source for finding your details is the government website. So it's the nslds.ed.gov website. So you go on there, and the instructions are listed here, but you go through these prompts and you can pull a very thorough breakdown of all the details of all your federal loans. That'll give you all the information you could possibly need to get really organized. For your private loans, it's a little different. So you want to go, I would start with your credit score to just kind of get an inventory, especially if you have multiple loans. Get an inventory of all your different loans through your credit score. And then, you could check with the lender. And ultimately, you want to get a copy of your promissory note. That outlines the terms and conditions with your loan. So this is a example organizer sheet that I use with clients that kind of helps them to outline all the terms of each individual loan, because each loan tends to have different terms and conditions and whatnot. So I'll send everybody this after the webinar. But ultimately, though, it's so your loan details are very important, but it's a concrete sort of deal. You just got to gather the information. Second thing, though, is your personal finances. You got to have a good handle on where you are financially. Are you keeping score? What's your net worth, cash flow, expenses, all that sort of stuff? Do you have any big risks that aren't covered? Do you have disability insurance, life insurance? Do you have an emergency fund? All that sort of stuff. You want to have all that in order as you address your student loan plan, because it tends to interrelate. What is your credit profile, like your credit score, debt to income ratio, earning potential, all that stuff? And then what is your professional situation? So that's kind of the last part to round out your situation is professionally, where are you working now? Are you working for, the big thing is are you working for a not-for-profit or a government, a public service loan forgiveness qualified employer? And what does your future look like? Are you going to continue to work in academics, not-for-profit type work? And for how long? And then probably the most important part of all of it is, what are your goals? So is the student loan just killing you? Do you want to crush it as quickly as possible? That's important. You got to kind of line all that out. You got to be on the same page with your spouse on all that. How's everything else come into play? Are you going to buy a house? If you're going to buy a house, maybe you want to wait to buy the house until you refinance your student loans, if that's the plan, because the refinance lenders will look negatively upon you owning a house. So there's all sorts of other goals. You want to prioritize what's most important to you. So really you want to, and a lot of this comes down to educating yourself. Maybe you consider seeking help, maybe on some of it, maybe on all of it. But I think what's most important is that you take some sort of action. Like, I always like to, on things like this, just set an appointment. So like I mentioned, the most important thing is the student loan plan. If you don't have a plan, you don't know where you're going. So if you don't have a plan, I would set an appointment with yourself to start crafting your plan. Begin the process of kind of organizing everything and lining out your goals and priorities and whatnot. So we talked about quite a few different scenarios, and I'm going to open it up to Q&A, and if anybody has questions, they can type it in the little question box. But so we talked about some of the different scenarios that I've come across, some of the pitfalls to avoid. We've also got into some of the public service loan forgiveness management strategies. We talked about some of the alternatives to public service loan forgiveness, particularly refinance. And most importantly, we hit on crafting your student loan plan. So it's a ton of stuff. And, I know it can be overwhelming. So really, if for some of you guys, you might want the quick and easy route. We have a service that we will provide to those that want to outsource all of it. So we can help organize student loans, create the plan, provide assistance with paperwork, help with the tax planning, the returns, all that stuff. So if people have interest in that, they can contact Jen in my office at renfinancial.com. So it's Jen at renfinancial.com. So we have an application process, an information gathering process that we go through first before we take on clients like that. Or you can subscribe to our blog, and we regularly post about student loan topics and other financial planning topics. And the last thing, we'll send out a follow-up email with this recorded and some of the, what I would call like my student loan resources in the form of a PDF and several different Excel spreadsheets. So are there any questions on any of these areas at this point? Any student loan related questions? I know it's getting kind of late. We'll go ahead and call it a day. And if you have questions, you're welcome to email Jen at renfinancial.com,